Everything surrounding Justin Herbert has changed this offseason, but hopefully that means he can revive his fantasy career in 2024. We dig into the fantasy outlook for the entire Chargers offense on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Majuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinny Iron. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. Check us out now, covering all the good off-season storylines.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. We are getting into our second AFC team because we're covering all 32 NFL teams, right? We've already finished all the NFC teams. We hit on the Chiefs on yesterday's show. We are moving over to the Chargers. We're going to talk about the entire Chargers offense and give you our fantasy takes on what they're going to look like this year in 2024. This is a hard team to try to figure out because so much is changing. Brutal year last year. Everything kind of went wrong, right? Horrible record at 5-12, last in the AFC West. The fantasy points weren't there. They ranked 29th in the NFL in fantasy points per game, only ahead of the Patriots and Giants. That's insane when you think about all the talent that they had. Now, Justin Herbert did fracture his finger, missed the last 4 games. Then everyone got fired, right? They moved on from Brandon Staley. They moved on from Kellen Moore. They bring in Jim Harbaugh. They bring in Greg Roman as OC. They trade away Keenan Allen. They release Mike Williams. They don't re-sign Austin Eckler. They don't have Gerald Everett anymore. So everything is changing. Now, they added Ladd McConkey in the second round in the draft, also drafted Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, later on in the draft, and then added DJ Chark in free agency for very, very cheap. They didn't really do a whole lot this offseason. They get you excited about the offense, but at the same time, Justin Herbert still leads this thing, right? And we know how talented he is, but it's been a while since we've seen him be good. So last year, he was a quarterback 11 in average points per game, quarterback 17 overall. And then the year prior in 2022, he's quarterback 17 in points per game. So it's been a while since that quarterback 2 finish in 2021. What do you expect, Vinny, out of Justin Herbert with the new coaches, with the new playmakers around him this year?
Well, to paraphrase one of my favorite comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, you're looking around here, and Justin Herbert has to be, who are these people? Who are these people? I have knew everything. Like, I don't know these people except for my offensive line, Rashawn Slater, but I have a new right tackle, too, and Joe Alt. So all my weapons are gone that I'm used to. This offense is now blown up into a run-heavy attack. It says something when Jim Harbaugh is just your biggest headliner, right, on your team that isn't your quarterback. So I'm excited to see what the Chargers can do in reality, but that doesn't mean they're going to be all that awesome in fantasy. Now let's go to Justin Herbert where he was last year. Very solid. If you look at the 13 games, he missed those games, as Michelle mentioned, with that fracture, or played in 13 games. QB 11 average. He was the QB 17 overall. Where's he ranked right now? He's at QB 16, 101 overall. ADP is a little bit higher at 91. And this is after losing Kellen Moore, who was a friendly kind of coordinator. It just didn't work out, right? He was putting up big numbers with Dak Prescott. We expect that to continue in Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts, but it just didn't work out for 1 year. But I feel bad for this guy. He's gone to Anthony Lynn. He's had Joe Lombardi. He's had all these guys come in, and now he's got to deal with Greg Roman. We know what Greg Roman does. It's a run-heavy offense. You go to Alex Smith, Colin Kaepernick, Lamar Jackson. You need a running quarterback. We've never seen this offense operate. I mean, even go to Tyrod Taylor. It does not operate usually with a quarterback with this kind of passing ability. So we haven't seen it before. Does that mean they're going to do read option and zone read with Justin Herbert? Unlikely. Like, you wouldn't do that. He has a big arm, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel that great. I mean, the history of Harbaugh and Roman is always close to 50-50. This was a 61% passing team last year. That's a significant chunk that's going to go down, and we think their defense is going to be better with Jesse Minter coming from Michigan as well. So this is going to be remolded in the Harbaugh kind of mindset. And keep in mind, even going back to Stanford when he had Andrew Luck, he was still a run-heavy kind of coach here. So I don't know. I don't feel all that great here, Michelle. How about you? I mean, just all the changes, I don't think they favor Justin Herbert in fantasy. I think they're good for him in reality. He'll probably be more efficient, but I don't like this in fantasy at all.
So I think it might all even out in fantasy, even though his pass attempts could come down like 100, right? He might have a lot fewer pass attempts, but like you might like the efficiency should be so much better. He was checking down to Austin Eckler too much. His yards per reception were so low under Kellen Moore, and also even prior to Moore, like he needs to use his big arm. He has a good big arm. Now, will he have the weapons to do it? We don't know. And then hopefully also with Greg Roman, he will get to scramble a little bit more. Like he's mobile. Yeah. So if he can get some rushing yards out of that, we're not even going to miss those pass attempts at all. I will say it's interesting because Herbert last year scored more points per game than Patrick Mahomes, right? And everyone's like, well, Mahomes is just going to bounce back. Like that's going to happen. And with Herbert, he's getting way pushed down the list. Now, I also agree if I had a bet on one to bounce back, it's Mahomes. Yeah. Because of the situation he's in over Herbert. But at the same point, I don't know if he should be that much lower in cost than Mahomes. I mean, he's going like, 70 picks after him. So I think maybe we're a little too down on him. I think the biggest worry, and my biggest worry is really not Greg Roman or the change with Jim Harbaugh. It's really not. It's the losses of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And I know people are excited about Ladd McConkey, and he can be very good, but that's a lot of pressure on a second-round rookie to come in and say, we need you to be our wide receiver one immediately. Maybe Quentin Johnson comes back to life. I mean, yeah, they did draft him in the first round last year, but they're putting a lot of pressure on these guys who just haven't done anything yet. So will I have Justin Herbert on many of my fantasy teams? No. But also I do think his price is maybe a little unfair. I do think he could be better than where he's priced right now.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I know it's a little bit different path to that production, but Lamar Jackson was a very good fantasy quarterback with Greg Roman. The real X factor, are they going to actually use Justin Herbert's legs? And when they have used his legs to effectiveness, there's been some numbers there, but he's just not that Lamar 10 carries in a game or 10 attempts in a game. That's not going to happen with the Justin Herbert. And maybe he did something different. I mean, Harbaugh and Roman are not dum-dums, hopefully, and they look at this arm and say, we can do a little bit more. And I think you look at Alex Smith, I think there's a little bit of comparison there that Alex Smith has put up some fancy numbers before. Granted, it was a lot with the Chiefs and the 49ers system, it wasn't there, but I think what they have is a better version of Alex Smith, right, who can throw the ball a little bit better downfield. But Alex Smith was actually been underrated as that kind of figure, but very athletic Herbert is, so he can handle a lot of things. Again, he's going to have to put up a lot of touchdown numbers, and he's got to be very efficient with his deep shots downfield because, the attempts are bound to go down. So, I don't know. I think that's probably fair to have him as a middling QB2 at this rate. Maybe a guy that you can get as a good value in Superflex or 2 quarterback leagues. But I think that's about it there, Michelle. And look at this kind of stretch here of quarterbacks in this ranking at 101. You have Jared Goff, Jaden Daniels ahead of him, as well as Caleb Williams. Behind him, Trevor Lawrence and Kirk Cousins. Now, do you feel, looking at that group with their weapons, do you feel like you want to take Justin Herbert ahead of any of those guys?
See, I do. Like, that's where I think, like, his price is a little unfair to him. I do think he'll have a better year than most of those guys overall. With Jaden Daniels would be the one I probably would just go over Herbert just for the upside of the rushing. And it feels a little bit safer to me, which is weird. He's a rookie. It feels safer. But with the rushing yards, it just feels like you're not going to be all that disappointed in Jaden Daniels. Like just the rushing gives him such a solid floor there. But Herbert and Lawrence will be the really hard question, right? Because Lawrence this year, they're very similar quarterbacks in a way that they can be mobile. They have a huge arm. They have talent. But also Lawrence's playmakers are iffy as well. Who would you go with if you had to choose between Herbert or Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, I think you could see improvements with both defenses. They've changed coordinators there in Jacksonville as well. And this defense has got some talent. So are they going to go in that direction? I think you have Doug Peterson. His history has been producing better fantasy quarterbacks. Carson Wentz, when he was healthy, he had the one big year. So there's some potential there with Trevor Lawrence maybe getting paid and that whole thing. I mean, Herbert got paid as well, but taking that pressure off Lawrence in that sense, playing for the contract, maybe not having to force the ball to a new weapon such as Calvin Ridley, maybe have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram back. I think there can be some numbers. So it really could come down to the same things with both these guys. How efficient are they in their big play passing and how much they give you supplemental on the ground in terms of yards and touchdowns. So that could really come down to that in determining who's the better quarterback. So Herbert and Lawrence in that situation, Herbert could come out on top. But yeah, it's hard to justify taking Herbert out over a lot of those other guys.
Now, if Ladd McConkey or Quentin Johnston end up breaking out this year, a lot of things could change our minds about Justin Herbert really quickly. So we have to dig into this new wide receiver room and figure out who we want on our fantasy teams, who we're staying away from. Maybe we're staying away from all three, but we'll dig into that right after we hear from one of our sponsors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Let's start with Ladd McConkey, right? Because right now he's getting hype out of camp. There are so many vacated targets going on for whoever is entering this as the wide receiver one, but 395 vacated targets from last year. We do expect the pass attempts to go down, but still someone has to step into this wide receiver one role that's vacant from Keenan Allen. And then also all those targets missing from Austin Eckler as well. And we will get into the running backs, but there's really no pass catching running backs right now. So many targets to go around. Ladd McConkey seems to be that guy that could be the true possession receiver, right? Like a Keenan Allen, because he's such a good route runner. He's that classic separator. He is on the smaller side at 5'11", 186 pounds, has really tiny hands, but also he's good, right? He's a good player. He got it done at Georgia, not like the craziest production, but was always consistent when they needed him. So you are higher on Ladd McConkey than I am. So you give me reasonings as to why he could be a good fantasy wide receiver in year one.
Well, I put some things through the computer here, and look, I think they're going to pass less. It's just going to happen here. I mean, you're looking at maybe 400 attempts, somewhere there, down from like 600. That is a significant amount, but they could be more efficient, as we said. And that's also kind of comparing it to what I've seen from Lamar Jackson in the Greg Roman offense in terms of total target or attempts here with Lamar, and then including Tyler Huntley is there, and same thing with the Chargers last year with Easton Stick. So when I'm looking at this, they're going to pass less, but the Ravens also had a clear leader in targets. It was Mark Andrews. He had 100 targets at their best year just a couple of years ago, and then it kind of trickled down from there. You had like 60, 70 for like a whole bunch of guys, including the running backs combined, and then the other wide receivers. So there's an opportunity for someone to hit the century mark in targets. Now, I look at who's got the profile of the Keenan Allen eating the targets from last year. You would say it's McConkey. It's a little bit different offense, but you don't really have a total impact tight end. They have Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst at this position. So this tells you they got to go inside. They got to have someone to move the chains, be consistent there. McConkey would be the guy. I think Josh Palmer has been okay at times, flash on the outside, and he could end up being a little bit more valuable than we think. But in terms of position he plays, McConkey in the slot, Quentin Johnston still trying to get going as a first-round pick. I lean McConkey as the guy. If I had to pick one guy getting 100 targets, it would be him. Right now, you look at him, wide receiver 47, They're 112 overall, 91 ADP, so everyone is high on him. Josh Palmer, wide receiver 59, 141, 131 ADP. And then you look at Johnson all the way down, wide receiver 66, 163 overall. People are a little bit higher. So everyone's taking the Chargers receivers a little bit higher, but I think the only one that makes sense to do that with is McConkey.
It's hard for me because when you look at going back to back is Ladd McConkey and then Rome Odunze, right? And we both know that Rome Odunze is 100 times the wide receiver that Ladd McConkey is. The issue is Odunze is going into a situation with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen that he has to fight with targets with. Well, McConkey could be the wide receiver one, right? He could be, but also, is he going to beat out Josh Palmer? Will Quentin Johnson take that step forward in the second year? We don't know. So I just think it's one of those things that maybe we're overthinking it because we know Rome Odunze is the better wide receiver. He went so early in the draft as well. He should be utilized right away. It's hard to figure out where those targets are going to come from with Allen, but Allen and DJ Moore, I just think this is one of those things we're overlooking it. And if I'm choosing between one of those, I'm just going to go with a much, much better player than Odunze.
Yeah, and Odunze really could have instant value here if Keenan Allen goes down. I mean, you know where Odunze is headed, where I'm not sure. If Palmer or Johnson go down, like, are they going to readjust? They do have Brendan Rice. They have Cornelius Johnson. They got Chark. They've got, they could split their targets between Disley and Hurst, on the inside. I don't know because it's so many variables here. And that's the thing. I would be interested in McConkey, but no higher than the wide receiver 4 that he's going in now. I think he has some wide receiver 3 upside, but that's probably his cap because this team is not going to pass enough to justify that. And while Odunze, you're sitting pretty. If Keenan Allen breaks down again with his age, and Keenan Allen could do that easily. We've seen that with the Chargers. And then you're looking at Odunze shoot up, right? I don't think you can get that in any way with McConkey. So, take him as a wide receiver 4. He could end up surprising you and be a matchup-based play that you look at in the slot when you have a weak slot corner. But consistency, I don't think you're going to get that from the passing game. That's why I'm not going to be too invested in a lower volume passing game, just kind of like the Chargers or the Ravens, right? We didn't go nuts beyond Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers, and there's no Andrews in this situation. So all that is something to consider here when we're looking at these Chargers wide receivers, and maybe overall a bit disappointing after what they had at Allen Williams.
I will say with Palmer, he's going a little bit later. He's going around guys like Romeo Doubs and Jerry Jeudy, Rashid Shaheed, who Shaheed might have more upside, but like Brandon Cooks, I do think if you're going to take a shot on a guy, I do also believe Palmer's only wide receiver 3 at best. As well, not the wide receiver 3, obviously, but a wide receiver 3. But if you're in a 3 wide receiver league and you just need someone that you're taking late to kind of give you depth at the wide receiver position, I do think he's a nice bet late there. What about Quentin Johnson? Do you have any hope on him, making a comeback in year 2? I know year 1 was so brutal for him, but he is a first-round pick just last year. He has a new head coach. He has a new OC. The wide receivers have left. The Chargers GM has been hyping him up this offseason. Now, I know players always get hyped up in the offseason. Now, he did have some terrible drops, but we have to remember there was a couple of plays there that in huge situations, Quentin Johnson was able to get open deep, right? And Herbert decided to target him in those huge situations. Now, he didn't come down with it, and he dropped it, but he was still had the capability and the skill set to get open, and Herbert trusted him. Probably shouldn't have. But what if he is able to catch the ball this year? What if he does fix his hands? He is that type of player, too, that could get things done with fewer targets. So maybe Quentin Johnson is a guy you should be taking super late in drafts because of the upside he does have.
Yeah, a team that we're going to watch carefully in terms of how the reps play out with training camp and the preseason with these receivers. Kind of really look at the beat reports, the roles here. And look, Johnson is a first-round talent for a reason. I know it's a little bit different regime and a different type of offense, so that's what he's going to have to overcome, while McConkey was drafted specifically for this offense. So those are two things you have to worry about. But again, Johnson doesn't get on the board as a first-round pick if he's not talented. So we're going to watch this very carefully, see where it goes. If Johnson's a little bit big play dependent, then we might be going for the volume of McConkey instead. But I think some Chargers going to give us some value. But again, as we've talked about, probably no higher, even in the best case scenario, as wide receiver three. Now, we will get into the backfield in our final segment. Yeah, you might think these two guys are very familiar playing for Harbaugh. They did in Baltimore. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. So we'll see what this new look backfield post Austin Ekeler looks like and who you should target among those two guys in our final segment. Wow, it's hard to believe. We have now crowned a Stanley Cup champion. The Florida Panthers are that team. We have the NBA champions, Boston Celtics. We have College World Series done. And now it's time to focus on baseball. And summertime is here. And FanDuel, there's a lot of action you can get on while you're waiting for the NFL season and games to get there with the action. But there are futures you can consider as well in the NFL. You can bet on it. FanDuel's got it for you. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from who's going to hit one out of the park to who's going to get that big victory on the mound. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, they've blown up this backfield. No more Austin Ekeler. So this is how it's playing out. And two guys that have had major knee injuries of late, playing for the other Harbaugh and the Ravens. So they basically stole his brother's backfield here for this power rushing attack. And then Dobbins, by the way, was a really late signing. Edwards was rather early after they moved on from Ekeler here. So this is a team that's likely looking at, based on their history from the Ravens and translating all that, around 500 rushing attempts. But that doesn't mean a lot of touches because it's about 50 to 60 targets that you get from these guys. So working with that, Michelle, you have Gus Edwards going as RB38, 109 overall, 126 ADP. You have J.K. Dobbins, 52, a round and a little bit more later at running back, 157 overall, 164 ADP. So this is what you're looking at. And let's start with what we had last year. Ekeler was RB23 average last season. Gus Edwards playing for the Ravens at RB29 with Dobbins hurt. So this doesn't inspire me at all to attach myself to either of these guys in the backfield, especially with their history of major injuries and not being able to be on the field.
Yeah, the thing is, last year, Gus Edwards got the opportunity to be the lead back for team, right? The Ravens, who it's pretty easy to run behind the Ravens offensive line with also defenses having to worry about Lamar Jackson. It's going to be much harder here with the Chargers, I believe. And then also, you just mentioned he finishes RB29 in points per game. He scored 13 touchdowns last year. 13 touchdowns, had 210 touches, and still was just the RB28 in points per game. Now, maybe he's RB28 again. And yeah, if you take him at RB41, he finishes RB28. That's a solid pick, right? And where he's going around with Zeke Elliott, Nick Chubb, like, I don't absolutely hate the pick. It's a fine pick if he's your RB2, RB3, that you're taking super late in drafts. The thing is, the ceiling is obviously not there, and he's going to be insanely touchdown dependent because this dude has never had more than 13 targets in a season in his career. And I don't know how much volume he's truly going to get. I do expect him to get the goal line work. So again, if he can score 13 touchdowns, sure. But it's going to be highly, highly touchdown dependent.
Yeah, I really don't know what to do with this backfield. Like, I'm so desperate to want to get in on it because Greg Roman, the rushing offense and the production and all that, and that Edwards came from the best rushing offense in the NFL in Baltimore, even with the change last year in OC from Roman. So I want to invest in this backfield, but I can't. I mean, the Dobbins thing is also lingering out there. Like, if anyone's going to catch passes, it would be him. Then you get deeper here. Isaiah Spiller still on the team. Maybe you have new coaching staff. You have Kimani Vidal as well as a rookie. So I really don't know what to do with this backfield. I mean, I need help. You look at some of the guys that are going around Edwards. Austin Ekeler is, strangely enough. Nick Chubb coming off the injury. That's a concern. Tyjae Spears sharing with Tony Pollard. The Jonathan Brooks. We'll see how that plays out. Ezekiel Elliott. Yeah, this is starting to be like, I don't know. I think I would take Edwards over those guys just because of the style of offense he's in. And look, Dobbins is totally unreliable. I don't know how we can go and say, I want to get Dobbins. I mean, he's teased us before. absolutely cannot stay healthy. So I think it's Edwards or bust for me on this, even though Dobbins might be a really cheap value.
Yeah, I mean Dobbins. What's really interesting is actually Kamani Vidal, the 6th-round pick, is actually going earlier than J.K. Dobbins in fantasy drafts right now. Now maybe dynasty drafts are skewing that, but he might have a chance to steal this backfield. Again, Gus Edwards is getting older, has dealt with injuries. J.K. Dobbins, he is a really good player. I don't want to take that away from him, but coming off an Achilles tear after just getting back from an ACL tear, like it's not going to be an easy path for him. It would have to be a crazy type of like historical recovery for him to come back and be like a good player. So you get this 6th-round pick might have a chance, right? He won Sun Belt Conference Offensive Player of the Year. He's fine size, 5'8", 213 pounds, so a little bit shorter, but 213 pounds is plenty big enough. He led Troy, so he played for Troy. He led the team with 1,661 rushing yards, 14 rushing touchdowns, was efficient as a receiving back. That set school records for both the single season rushing yards and also his career rushing yards he had at Troy. Like, he's a talented back. And yes, I know 6th-round running backs don't typically do too much, but there are guys lately that's been your Kyron Williams, your Phillip Lindsays, your James Robinsons. And if I had to put down money on a guy that's going to be a late-round pick this year that could be one of those type of players, I think I'm going with Vidal just because of the situation he's in and the competition he has to, kind of take over a backfield.
Yeah, we had some flashes of the old Keaton Mitchell last year, and you might see a little bit of that. Everyone's got to have this young, fast back that's a little bit smaller. It seems like every team wants to collect one of these. And again, I don't see a high passing volume based on Greg Roman's offenses. It's usually, again, dump off type. It's not like they feature the back in the passing game all that much. So keep that in mind. And if Dobbins is unavailable, Edwards can't catch passes. I mean, Vidal might be scooping up a lot of these to cheap targets, right? On top of everything else. Maybe have some chances to reel off some big plays in this offense. But I think anything goes. I think the bottom line is Justin Herbert we might be down on, but everything else, just pay attention, see what's going on. We might be out in terms of just in our minds, but we also know it's going to be a good rushing offense, and we know there's a lot of vacated targets in the passing game of which should take advantage. So something is going to pan out here. It's just, again, too good of a coaching staff where it's not going to have the assets kind of dry up as we expect here. So, Michelle, I'm just going to be patient. I'm not going to jump on the Chargers everywhere, but I do like your approach of like maybe looking at Vidal and McConkey, the rookies, above all else.
And maybe, veteran running backs get cut after, during training camp. So maybe there's a veteran running back like an Alvin Kamara that gets cut, released, and we get something exciting in this backfield. We'll have to wait and watch there. But that is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, Vinny and I will be back tomorrow to talk about the Raiders, talk about another really, really difficult team to figure out for fantasy, but it'll be a fun time. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.